The blood-red sun cast long shadows across the Nebraska prairie as Lillian Roberts clung desperately to the handrail of the Union Pacific train, her swollen belly making it nearly impossible to maintain her balance as the conductor and his assistant tried to force her from the moving vehicle. "Please," she begged, tears streaming down her dirt-streaked face. "I have a ticket. There's been a mistake." But her pleas fell on deaf ears as the men, convinced she was a stowaway, gave one final push, sending her tumbling down the embankment outside of Kearney, Nebraska, in the unforgiving summer of 1873. Beau Irwin pulled his hat lower to shield his eyes from the setting sun, guiding his paint horse along the railroad tracks that cut through his grazing land. At 30 years old, he'd built a modest ranch after years of driving cattle north from Texas, finally settling in this corner of Nebraska where the land was good and the people few. He preferred it that way. The solitude suited him after years of chaos during and after the war. His horse suddenly shied, nostrils flaring at something ahead along the tracks. Beau's hand instinctively moved to the revolver on his hip, a habit formed from years on dangerous trails. But as he rode closer, he realized the dark shape on the ground wasn't a predator or threat. It was a woman. "Madam!" Beau dismounted quickly, approaching the unconscious figure sprawled awkwardly at the bottom of the railway embankment. Her fine dress was torn and covered in dust, her face bruised, but what stopped Beau cold was the prominent swell of her abdomen beneath her hands, which even unconscious seemed to cradle protectively. "Dear God," he muttered, kneeling beside her. He checked for a pulse, relief flooding through him when he felt the steady beat beneath his fingertips. She was alive, but her skin was hot to the touch, and a nasty gash ran along her temple, still seeping blood. The nearest doctor was in Kearney, a good hour's ride away, and the sun was disappearing fast. Beau looked around, hoping to see the lanterns of a nearby homestead, but there was nothing but prairie grass swaying in the evening breeze. He'd have to take her to his ranch. It was the only option. "I'm sorry, madam," he said softly, though he knew she couldn't hear him. "I'll be as gentle as I can." Carefully, Beau lifted the unconscious woman, surprised at how light she felt despite her condition. He whistled for his horse, who approached cautiously, as if sensing the gravity of the situation. With considerable effort, Beau mounted while holding the woman securely against his chest. "We'll get you somewhere safe," he promised as they began the ride home. "I ain't going to leave you." Not like this. The journey to his homestead seemed to take an eternity. The woman remained unconscious, occasionally moaning softly when the horse's movements jostled her. By the time the silhouette of Beau's small ranch house came into view against the night sky, his arms ached from holding her, but he'd never once considered setting her down. Beau's ranch hand, an older man named Hank who had worked with him since Texas, rushed out when he heard the approaching hoofbeats. "Good Lord, boy, what you got there?" Hank exclaimed, holding up a lantern to reveal the woman's face. "Found her thrown from the train, looks like." "She's with child, Hank. Bad hurt." Beau carefully dismounted with Hank's help. "Get Wilma from the Daniels place. Tell her we need her here now." Wilma Daniels had been delivering babies in the Nebraska territory for over 20 years. If anyone could help this woman, it would be her. "You gonna take her to town, to the doctor?" Hank asked, already moving toward his horse. Beau shook his head. "She wouldn't make the trip. Too risky, just get Wilma." Inside his modest two-room house, Beau laid the woman on his bed, hastily removing her dirt-covered shoes and the torn outer layer of her dress to make her more comfortable. He dampened a cloth and gently cleaned the blood from her face, taking inventory of her injuries. The head wound worried him most, but there were bruises forming on her arms and shoulders too. "Who did this to you?" he whispered, anger rising in his chest at the thought of someone throwing a pregnant woman from a moving train. As if in response to his voice, her eyelids fluttered, and for a brief moment they opened. Her eyes were a startling blue, bright with fever or fear, Beau couldn't tell which. "My baby," she whispered, her hands instinctively moving to protect her belly. "Your baby's still there," Beau assured her. "You're both alive. I'm going to make sure you stay that way." Her eyes closed again, but her breathing seemed calmer. Beau sat beside the bed, continuing to press cool cloths to her forehead while he waited for Wilma. It was nearly midnight when the midwife arrived, a stocky woman in her 50s with capable hands and a no-nonsense attitude. She took one look at the situation and began barking orders. "Boil water, get me clean linens, and then make yourself scarce, Beau Irwin. This ain't a place for a man right now." Beau did as he was told but hesitated at the doorway. "Will she be all right, Wilma, and the baby?" Wilma's expression softened slightly. "I'll do everything I can. Now go on, wait outside, I'll call if I need you." The next few hours were the longest of Beau's life. He paced the small front room of his house, listening to the occasional moans from the bedroom and Wilma's steady, comforting voice. Hank sat with him for a while before returning to the bunkhouse, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Just before dawn, a new sound pierced the prairie night, the thin, outraged cry of a newborn. Beau froze mid-step, his heart hammering in his chest. He moved closer to the bedroom door, listening intently. "That's it, little one," he heard Wilma coo. "Strong lungs on this boy, just like his mama." A boy. The woman had delivered a son. Relief flooded through Beau, followed immediately by concern. He hadn't heard the mother's voice. A few minutes later, Wilma opened the door, wiping her hands on her apron. Her face was grave. "The baby's healthy as can be, considering." "But she's in a bad way, Beau. Lost a lot of blood in that blow to the head." She shook her head. "I don't know if she'll wake, and if she does, what state her mind will be in." "She has to wake," Beau said firmly. "That little boy needs his mother." "Well, right now, what he needs is milk." "I've wrapped him up beside her, but we'll need a wet nurse if she doesn't improve soon. There's a woman in town who just lost her baby. I'll send word with Hank in the morning." Beau nodded, his gaze moving past Wilma to the bed where the woman lay pale as death, with a tiny bundle nestled against her side. "Can I?" He gestured toward the room. "Go on," Wilma sighed. "I've done all I can for now. I'll be back in the morning." "Keep her cool. Try to get some water down her throat if she stirs." After Wilma left, Beau entered the bedroom cautiously. In the soft light of the oil lamp, he could see the woman more clearly than before. Despite the bruising, she was beautiful, with delicate features and hair the color of autumn wheat. She couldn't be more than 25, he guessed. The baby made a small, mewling sound, and Beau carefully sat on the edge of the bed. The infant was tiny, with a shock of dark hair and tightly closed fists. "Hello there, little man," Beau whispered. "You sure picked a hard way to come into this world." The baby's eyes opened briefly dark blue, like all newborns, before closing again. Something twisted in Beau's chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of protectiveness, of purpose. "I don't know who your mama is or what happened to her," he said softly, "but I promise you this. I won't leave either of you, not until you're both safe and well." As the first light of dawn filtered through the curtains, Beau made a silent vow to the unconscious woman and her newborn son. Whatever had brought them to his land, whatever troubles followed them, he would stand between them and harm. He would stay. For 3 days, Lillian Roberts hovered between life and death. Wilma returned daily, bringing a wet nurse named Sarah who had recently lost her own child. The baby boy whom Beau had taken to calling little man in the absence of a proper name was thriving despite the circumstances of his birth. On the fourth morning, as Beau sat beside the bed changing the compress on Lillian's forehead, her eyes suddenly opened. Clear blue, no longer clouded with fever, they fixed on his face with unmistakable fear. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. "Where am I?" "My baby, your son is fine, madam," Beau said quickly, rising to pour a glass of water. "He's with a wet nurse in the next room. You've been unconscious for nearly 4 days." Her hands frantically moved to her now deflated abdomen. "I had the baby. I don't remember. I don't." Tears filled her eyes. "It's all right," Beau soothed, helping her take a sip of water. "Wilma says that happens sometimes. The memory might come back or it might not, but your son is healthy and strong." "Where am I?" she repeated, trying to sit up but falling back with a grimace of pain. "My ranch outside Kearney. I found you by the railroad tracks. Looked like you'd been thrown from the train." Beau hesitated, then asked, "Can you tell me your name, madam, and maybe what happened?" She swallowed hard, one hand reaching up to touch the bandage on her temple. "Lillian," she said after a moment. "Lillian Roberts. I was traveling from St. Louis to San Francisco, my husband." Her voice broke. "Thomas is dead, killed in a mining accident in Colorado. I was going to his family in California. I had a ticket, I swear it, but the conductor, he said it was forged. They thought I was trying to steal passage. I tried to explain, but they wouldn't listen. She closed her eyes, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. They pushed me off while the train was moving." Anger surged through Beau at the casual cruelty. "Those men should be horse-whipped," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "My baby," Lillian said again, urgency in her tone. "Please, I need to see him. Of course. I'll get him right away." Beau stood and went to the door, calling for Sarah. The wet nurse appeared moments later with the infant, who was awake and quietly observing the world around him with unfocused eyes. "Oh, thank God," Lillian whispered as Sarah placed the baby in her arms. She stared down at her son's face with such naked love that Beau had to look away, feeling like an intruder in this sacred moment. "He's beautiful," Sarah said kindly. "Been no trouble at all. Takes to feeding well." "Thank you," Lillian replied, her voice choked with emotion. "Thank you for caring for him." "I'll leave you two alone," Beau said, moving toward the door. "You need to rest, Mrs. Roberts. We can talk more when you're stronger." "Wait," Lillian called, looking up from her son's face. "I don't even know your name. You saved us." "Beau Irwin, madam." "And anyone would have done the same." "No," she said with surprising firmness. "They wouldn't. Thank you, Mr. Irwin. I owe you a debt I can never repay." Beau tipped his hat slightly, embarrassed by her gratitude. "No debt between us, Mrs. Roberts. Just get well. That's all the thanks I need." Over the next week, Lillian grew stronger each day. The baby, whom she named Thomas after his father, continued to thrive. Sarah came daily to help with feedings, as Lillian's milk had not fully come in due to the trauma of her birth experience. Beau kept his distance as much as possible, wanting to give Lillian privacy and space to recover. He moved into the bunkhouse with Hank, leaving his house entirely to Lillian and little Thomas. Each evening, however, he would check in, bringing fresh food prepared by Hank's wife or simply sitting with her for a short while, talking about nothing of consequence. He learned she was 23, the daughter of a school teacher in St. Louis. She'd married Thomas Roberts at 19, following him west when gold fever struck. They'd been happy, she said, until the mine collapse that killed him and 5 other men just 2 months ago. "I had nowhere else to go," she explained one evening as she rocked little Thomas in a chair Beau had dragged in from the porch. "His parents in San Francisco offered me a home. I thought it was my only option." "And now," Beau asked, careful to keep his tone neutral. Lillian sighed, looking down at her sleeping son. Now I don't know. I have a little money. Thomas was careful that way, but not enough to start over somewhere completely new. She looked up, meeting Beau's gaze directly. I've imposed on your kindness long enough, Mr. Irwin. As soon as the doctor says I'm fit to travel, we'll be on our way. There's no rush, Beau said, perhaps too quickly. Winter's coming soon. Traveling with a newborn in cold weather isn't wise. He cleared his throat. Besides, Hank's wife loves having a baby around. You'd be doing me a favor, staying through the winter. She's less likely to pester me about finding a wife if she's got you and Thomas to fuss over. It was a transparent excuse, and they both knew it, but Lillian smiled gratefully. If you're certain it's not an imposition. Not at all, Beau assured her, standing to leave. This house has been too quiet for too long. As autumn deepened into winter, Lillian gradually took on more responsibilities around the ranch. Though Beau insisted she focus on recovering and caring for Thomas, she was determined not to be a burden. Soon she was cooking meals, mending clothes, and even helping with the ranch accounts, which she discovered Beau had been neglecting terribly. How can you run a business without knowing your precise costs and income? She asked incredulously one December evening, surrounded by his haphazard ledgers. Beau shrugged, watching her with amusement from his chair by the fire. He'd moved back into the house, taking the small front room as his bedroom while Lillian and Thomas remained in the larger bedroom. Always figured if there was money left at the end of the year, I was doing all right, he said. Lillian shook her head, a smile playing at her lips. It's a wonder you haven't been cheated blind by cattle buyers. Probably have been, Beau admitted with a chuckle. Their easy companionship had developed gradually, almost imperceptibly. Beau couldn't pinpoint when exactly Lillian had stopped being his unexpected guest and started feeling like she belonged at the ranch. He only knew that the thought of her leaving in the spring filled him with a dread he wasn't ready to examine too closely. Little Thomas grew stronger each day, his personality emerging as winter settled over the Nebraska plains. He had his mother's blue eyes and a disposition that Beau privately thought must have come from her, as well curious, determined, and surprisingly even tempered for an infant. Beau found himself increasingly enchanted by the baby. He'd never spent much time around children, but Thomas's toothless smiles and grabbing hands were impossible to resist. Before long, Beau was volunteering to hold him while Lillian cooked or rested, walking the floor with him when he was fussy, and even attempting to fashion crude wooden toys for when he grew older. You're good with him, Lillian observed one evening as Beau successfully soothed Thomas back to sleep after a crying spell. Have you been around babies before? Never, Beau admitted, carefully transferring the sleeping infant to his cradle, a beautiful piece Hank had built as a Christmas gift. Guess he's just easy to please. Hardly, Lillian laughed softly. He's particular about who holds him. Won't settle for Sarah anymore or even for Wilma. Just you and me. Beau felt an unexpected warmth at her words. Smart boy, he said, his voice gruff with emotion he couldn't quite name. Knows who his people are. The moment the words left his mouth, he regretted them. Thomas wasn't his. This wasn't his family. Come spring, Lillian would leave, taking her son to his grandparents in California as planned. I'm sorry, he said quickly. I didn't mean to presume. Don't apologize, Lillian interrupted, her expression unreadable in the firelight. You've been more of a father to him in these first months than many men are in years. He's fortunate to have you in his life, even if it's just for a while. Just for a while. The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken implications. Christmas came, bringing a brief respite from the isolation of winter. Neighbors from miles around gathered at the church in Kearney for services, followed by a community dinner. Beau, who normally avoided such gatherings, found himself eager to attend with Lillian and Thomas. The attention they received was overwhelming. Women clustered around Lillian, cooing over Thomas and casting speculative glances at Beau. Men clapped him on the back, making knowing comments about domestic life that left his ears burning. "They think we're married," Lillian whispered to him during dinner, her cheeks flushed. "I've tried to explain, but—" "Let them think what they want," Beau replied, surprising himself with his boldness. "People will gossip regardless." Later, as they drove home through the silent, snow-covered landscape, Thomas sleeping soundly in Lillian's arms, Beau gathered his courage. "Would it be so terrible?" he asked quietly. "What they think?" Lillian was silent for so long that Beau feared he'd offended her. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely audible above the crunch of snow beneath the wagon wheels. "No," she said, "it wouldn't be terrible at all." The unspoken hung between them, neither ready to reach for what both increasingly wanted. January brought the harshest weather Nebraska had seen in years. Blizzards swept across the plains, confining them to the ranch house for days at a time. In those close quarters, their careful dance of propriety became more difficult to maintain. Beau found his eyes following Lillian as she moved around the house, noticing the graceful curve of her neck, the way her hair caught the firelight, the sound of her humming to Thomas as she rocked him. He tried to keep his distance, to remember she was still grieving her husband, but his feelings grew despite his best efforts. For her part, Lillian seemed to seek out his company more deliberately. She asked his opinion on household matters, listened attentively to his stories of cattle drives and his time in the war, and sometimes, when Thomas was sleeping, simply sat beside him in comfortable silence as they watched the flames dance in the fireplace. One night, after Thomas had been particularly difficult to settle, Beau found Lillian sitting alone at the kitchen table, tears streaming silently down her face. "Lillian," he asked gently, hesitating in the doorway, "are you all right?" She wiped hastily at her cheeks. "I'm fine. Just tired, I suppose." Beau sat across from her, instinctively reaching for her hand. She didn't pull away. "It's more than that. Please tell me." Lillian took a shaky breath. "I received a letter today from Thomas's parents." Beau's heart sank. "They're expecting you in the spring." "Yes." "And no." She looked up, meeting his gaze directly. "They're offering me a place in their home, but there are conditions. They want to raise Thomas as a Roberts in the family tradition. They've outlined my role quite specifically." The bitterness in her voice was unmistakable. "What does that mean?" "It means I would be little more than a nursemaid in my own son's life. They would make all decisions regarding his upbringing, his education, his future." She withdrew her hand from his, clenching it into a fist. "They blame me, you see. They think if I hadn't insisted on following Thomas to Colorado, he never would have taken that mining job. They're probably right." "That's not fair," Beau said firmly. "A man makes his own choices. You didn't cause that accident. Fair or not, it's how they feel." Lillian sighed. "But what choice do I have? I have no home, no means of supporting myself and a child." Beau's heart raced as he contemplated his next words. "You have choices, Lillian. You could stay here." She looked up sharply. "As your housekeeper, your charity case." "I couldn't bear that, Beau." "No," he said, his voice low and earnest. "Not as my housekeeper, not as charity." He took a deep breath. "As my wife." Lillian's eyes widened, a mixture of shock and something else, hope perhaps, crossing her face. "Beau, you can't mean that. We've known each other barely 4 months." "I know it sounds sudden. Maybe it is. But I also know that in these 4 months you've brought more life and light into this house than it's seen in all the years I've lived here." He reached for her hand again, relieved when she didn't pull away. "I'm not asking you to love me, Lillian." I know your heart still belongs to Thomas, but I'm offering you and your son a home, a family, a future where you make the decisions. And maybe, in time, you deserve more than a woman who can't give you her whole heart," Lillian whispered. "Maybe I do. But I want you and Thomas more than I want that ideal." Beau squeezed her hand gently. "Just think about it. That's all I ask." Lillian didn't answer immediately, but that night, as Beau lay awake staring at the ceiling, his door creaked open. She stood in the doorway, Thomas sleeping against her shoulder. "Yes," she said simply. "My answer is yes." They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Kearney, with Hank and Wilma as their witnesses and baby Thomas sleeping peacefully throughout the ceremony. It wasn't a grand affair, but as Lillian stood beside Beau in a dress borrowed from a neighbor, her hand steady in his as they exchanged vows, neither seemed to mind the simplicity. The transition to married life was both easier and more complex than either had anticipated. They'd been living under the same roof for months, sharing meals and the care of Thomas, developing routines and understanding each other's habits. Yet the shift in their relationship added new dimensions they had to navigate carefully. The physical aspect of marriage was approached with gentle hesitancy on both sides. Beau was painfully aware that Lillian was still healing from her first husband's death, while Lillian struggled with feelings of guilt, as if allowing herself happiness with Beau somehow dishonored Thomas's memory. "I need time," she told Beau on their wedding night, her voice trembling slightly as they stood awkwardly in the bedroom they would now share. "I want to be a true wife to you, but we have all the time in the world," Beau assured her, pressing a chaste kiss to her forehead. "I meant what I said, Lillian. I'm not expecting anything you're not ready to give." That night, they slept side by side, not touching except for Lillian's hand finding his in the darkness just before she fell asleep. As February's snows gave way to March winds, their relationship deepened. Beau found unexpected joy in the simple domestic rhythms, waking to find Lillian beside him, sharing coffee before dawn, watching her sing to Thomas as she went about her daily tasks. Little Thomas began to recognize Beau more distinctly, his tiny face lighting up when Beau entered a room, his arms reaching out to be held. One evening, as they sat together after Thomas had been put to bed, Lillian broached a subject they'd both been avoiding. "I need to write to Thomas's parents," she said, her hands busy with mending, "to tell them about our marriage and that we won't be coming to California." Beau nodded, watching her face carefully. "Do you regret it, not taking Thomas to meet his grandparents?" Lillian set down her sewing, considering the question seriously. "I regret that he won't know that part of his family, but no, I don't regret staying here, becoming your wife." She met his gaze directly. "You've given us both a chance at happiness I never thought possible again." Impulsively, Beau moved to sit beside her, taking her hands in his. "I want you to be happy, Lillian, both of you, whatever that takes." "I am happy," she said softly. "Happier than I have any right to be, considering everything." Beau reached up to brush a strand of hair from her face, his touch lingering. "You deserve every happiness, Lillian Irwin." The sound of her new name on his lips brought a flush to her cheeks. Slowly, hesitantly, she leaned forward until her lips met his in their first true kiss since their wedding. It was gentle at first, almost tentative, but deepened as Beau's arms encircled her, drawing her closer. When they broke apart, both breathing faster, Lillian's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I thought I would never feel this way again," she whispered. "Neither did I," Beau admitted, resting his forehead against hers. "But here we are." That night, their marriage was truly consummated, with a tenderness and passion that surprised them both. As Lillian lay in his arms afterward, her head resting on his chest, she felt the last vestiges of guilt slipping away, replaced by a profound gratitude for this second chance at love. "I love you," she said into the darkness, the words both a revelation and a relief. "I didn't think it was possible to love two men in one lifetime, but I love you, Beau Irwin." His arms tightened around her. "I've loved you since that first day you opened your eyes and asked about your son," he confessed. "And I'll love you for all the days I have left." Spring brought new life to the ranch in more ways than one. The cattle that had survived the harsh winter were joined by new calves. The fields turned green with fresh grass, and Lillian discovered she was expecting a child, their child. The news filled Beau with a joy so profound, it sometimes frightened him. He had never imagined himself as a father, had resigned himself to a solitary life after the war took so many of his friends and family. Yet here he was, with a wife, a son he loved as his own, and another child on the way. "Are you happy about it?" Lillian asked anxiously when she told him, her hands protectively covering her still flat stomach. "I know we didn't plan this so soon." Beau lifted her off her feet in response, spinning her around in the kitchen while she laughed in surprise. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," he said when he set her down, his voice rough with emotion. "You've given me more than I ever dreamed possible, Lillian." Thomas, now 6 months old and learning to sit up on his own, watched their celebration with wide blue eyes, babbling excitedly at their obvious joy. "And you, little man," Beau said, scooping the baby up, "are going to be the finest big brother in all of Nebraska." As Lillian's pregnancy progressed, the ranch prospered. Beau's careful management, guided by Lillian's meticulous bookkeeping, resulted in their most profitable season yet. They hired additional hands to help with the increased workload, allowing Beau to spend more time close to home. In August, they received an unexpected letter from San Francisco. Thomas's parents, initially cold and disapproving of Lillian's remarriage, had had a change of heart. They requested permission to visit, to meet their grandson and make peace with the past. "What do you think?" Lillian asked Beau, uncertainty in her voice as she read the letter aloud. They were so harsh before. Beau considered carefully before answering. "They're Thomas's blood kin. If they're sincere about wanting a relationship with him, I think we should give them that chance." He placed his hand over hers. "But you decide, Lillian. If you're not comfortable with it, we'll write back and decline." Lillian's expression softened with gratitude. "This is why I love you," she said. "You always consider our feelings first." She looked down at the letter again. "Let's invite them. In October after the harvest. That way we'll have time to prepare and—" She smiled, patting her growing belly. "They'll get to meet 2 grandchildren instead of 1. The visit from the Roberts was initially tense but ultimately healing. Harold and Margaret Roberts arrived with trunks full of gifts for Thomas, and profuse apologies for their earlier coldness. They were clearly taken aback by the sight of their daughter-in-law, heavily pregnant with another man's child, but made visible efforts to be welcoming to Beau. "You've built a good life here," Harold commented as Beau showed him around the ranch. "My son would be pleased to know Lillian and Thomas are well cared for." "They're more than cared for, sir," Beau said firmly. "They're loved." Harold studied him for a moment before nodding. "Yes, I can see that. It's all a father could hope for, really." By the time they departed a week later, genuine warmth had developed between the families. Margaret had knitted baby clothes for the coming child, Harold had bonded with Thomas, and plans were made for future visits. "I never thought I'd see the day," Lillian marveled as they watched the Roberts carriage disappear down the road. "A year ago, I thought I'd lost everything. Now look at us." Beau wrapped his arm around her shoulders, his other hand resting on her swollen belly where their child kicked vigorously. "Life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it." Their daughter, Emma Grace Irwin, was born on a crisp November morning in 1874, arriving with considerably less drama than her brother but with equally robust lungs. She had Beau's dark hair and what Wilma insisted was Lillian's chin, though Beau thought it was too early to tell. As Beau held his daughter for the first time, looking from her tiny face to Lillian's exhausted but radiant smile to Thomas, who was trying to climb onto the bed to see his new sister, he felt a completeness he had never known was possible. "Thank you," he said to Lillian, his voice choked with emotion. "For what?" she asked, reaching out to touch his face. "For falling off that train," he said with a small smile. "For letting me find you, for staying." Lillian laughed softly, shaking her head. "That's a terrible thing to be thankful for." "Maybe," Beau conceded. "But I can't help thinking that if any part of our story had been different, we might not be here now. And I wouldn't trade any of it for all the gold in California." As winter settled once again over the Nebraska prairie, the Irwin family found themselves in a very different place than a year before. The ranch house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family, with a proper nursery for Emma and a bedroom for Thomas, who at 14 months was walking unsteadily and developing a decidedly mischievous personality. On Christmas Eve, with both children miraculously asleep at the same time, Beau and Lillian sat before the fire, her head resting on his shoulder as they enjoyed a rare moment of peace. "You ever wonder about the men who threw you from that train?" Beau asked suddenly, the question having bothered him periodically over the past year. Lillian was quiet for a moment before responding. "I used to. I was so angry, so afraid of what would become of us." She shifted to look up at him. "But now I can't help but think it was the best thing that could have happened to Thomas and me." "Best thing?" Beau raised an eyebrow. "You nearly died." "But we didn't die," Lillian pointed out. "We found you, and you kept your promise. You stayed." She reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the lines at the corners of his eyes. "So no, I don't waste time wondering about those men anymore. They're part of a past that led me here, and I wouldn't change that for anything." Beau turned his head to kiss her palm. "When I found you that day, I made a vow that I'd stay until you were safe and well. Never imagined you'd end up staying too." "I believe some things are meant to be," Lillian said softly. "Despite all the pain and loss, somehow we found each other exactly when we needed to." Outside, snow began to fall, blanketing the ranch in pristine white. Inside, the fire crackled warmly as Beau pulled Lillian closer, savoring the quiet miracle of their unlikely family, a family born from tragedy but thriving in love, proof that even in the harsh reality of the frontier, second chances were possible for those brave enough to grasp them. Years passed, and the Irwin ranch flourished. Thomas grew into a thoughtful young man with his birth father's mechanical aptitude and Beau's quiet strength. Emma, headstrong and bright, became the apple of her father's eye. They were joined by two more brothers, James in 1876 and William in 1879, completing the family that had begun so improbably that summer day in 1873. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Beau surprised Lillian with a journey, their first real vacation together. They left the children in the capable hands of Hank's now grown daughter and her husband, who had taken over much of the ranch management as Beau focused more on breeding stock and less on the day-to-day operations. Their destination was a small cabin in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains, where the air was cool even in February, and the views stretched endlessly in all directions. "It's beautiful," Lillian breathed as they stood on the porch their first evening, watching the sun set over the distant peaks. "Not as beautiful as you," Beau replied, wrapping his arms around her from behind. At 45, his hair was streaked with gray, but his embrace was as strong as ever. Lillian leaned back against him, content in the knowledge that their love had only deepened with time. 10 years, she marveled. Sometimes it feels like we've always been together, and sometimes it seems like just yesterday you found me by those tracks. Best day of my life, Beau murmured against her hair, even if I didn't know it at the time. As darkness fell and stars appeared in the clear mountain sky, Lillian turned in his arms to face him. At 33, she was still as beautiful to him as the day he'd first seen her open her eyes in his bed, asking after her newborn son. "I've been thinking about fate," she said, her expression thoughtful. "How the worst moments can lead to the best ones if you're brave enough to keep going. Like being thrown from a train and found by a lonely cowboy," Beau suggested with a small smile. "Exactly like that." Lillian reached up to touch the silver at his temples. "I used to think happiness was something fragile, easily broken. But it's not, is it? It's stronger than we give it credit for." "Strong as you are," Beau agreed, leaning down to kiss her. "Strong enough to survive anything, if we face it together." Later, as they lay together beneath warm blankets, listening to the wind in the pines outside their cabin, Lillian thought about the long, winding path that had led her here. The pain of loss, the fear of abandonment, the unexpected joy of second chances, all of it had shaped her, strengthened her, brought her to this moment of perfect contentment. "I love you, Beau Irwin," she whispered into the darkness. "Thank you for finding me, for keeping your promise to stay." "Always," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "For as long as we both shall live." And as they drifted to sleep in each other's arms, both knew with absolute certainty that some vows, once made, were kept not out of obligation, but out of a love that grew stronger with each passing day, a love born in the most unlikely of circumstances on the wild Nebraska prairie, where a fallen woman and the cowboy who found her had built a life neither could have imagined, but both would forever cherish.